And we're very pleased and honored to have Vanessa Gezari with us. You can see her bio on the back. She's the managing editor of the Columbia Journalism Review and an adjunct professor at Columbia University Journalism School. She's a veteran war correspondent reporting from 4 continents for at media outlets such as the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Slate, and others. And she'll be speaking about her role not only as a journalist, but also now as an editor, which is somewhat different, and the evolution from one particular position to the other. Thank you. Please welcome Vanessa Gezari.
As Dr. Carl mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about being on both sides of the project in media. First as a what they call now in the business a content producer, horrible, I know, a reporter, and now as an editor, and some of what I've learned from that. So I'll just tell you a little bit, and I'll try to be quick here, because I think the really fun part of this is going to be the Q&A. So I want to keep track of the time. I have spent most of my career as a foreign correspondent, and most of that as an independent foreign correspondent. I have worked on staff for various news organizations over the years, but mainly I have been a freelancer. And that's got pros and cons. I love this big thing that says pay the writer. This is like something that we should all have, like, kind of tattooed on our heads. I certainly felt more strongly about that when I was a writer than now. As an editor, I have to actually pay writers and figure out how to do that. I work for a nonprofit, and it's like kind of looking at your budget, and so I see it from, like many things, I see it from a different angle now. I tell people I got fired from every job I ever had until I became a reporter. I'm a terrible waitress, and that was what you did in my town growing up. I grew up in Connecticut, and so I got a little job at my local newspaper when I was between my junior and senior years in college in the summer, and I really loved it. And I went on from there. I graduated from college, and I got an internship in Toledo, Ohio, at the Toledo Blade, which is actually a really good little sort of regional newspaper, not little, not big, mid-sized. And I spent a couple of years out there, and 3 years, I guess, and did all kinds of things that you do as a young reporter. I covered cops, I covered courts, I covered City Hall for a while. I wrote an investigative series. I wrote a lot of obituaries because they were all their own. The paper wrote all its own obituaries, which is a really fun and great learning experience. It's a great way to get into the history of the area where you're covering. And then from there, I went to the Chicago Tribune to sort of be the galley slave. These are jobs that they give to young reporters to let you write for a big paper while they pay you nothing, and assign you to write 4 stories in a day. And at the end of a year of that, you're like so exhausted that you're sort of questioning whether this is really what you want to do anymore. And so at that point, after that, when I was in my mid-20s, I decided I was going to do something that I had always wanted to do, but I hadn't done right out of college, which was to travel and report a little bit out in the world. And so I bought a plane ticket to India, where I had been once before, and I found it really mysterious and confusing, and I thought it would be great to be able to write about that for people back in America. And so I got on the plane to go to New Delhi on the night of September 10th, 2001. That's thinking for a second. So September 10th, 2001, in the evening, my mother took me to JFK, and I got on a plane and flew over Manhattan and out, and then to London, where I had a layover and was going to fly on to Delhi. And of course, I got to London and I didn't get any further than that for a few days because there were no flights after that. And I reached my mother on the phone, and she said, "You have to come home. There's going to be a war in Afghanistan." And I had never done anything like, war reporting. I had not done any international reporting. And I called a mentor of mine, and he said, "Just keep going." So I got on the plane to New Delhi, and within a month, I was in Pakistan, and the United States started bombing Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001, and I landed in Lahore on October 9th with a bunch of really heavy and inappropriate garb that I was using to hide any sign of not being from Pakistan, which definitely did not, I did not succeed in hiding that I was not from Pakistan. In fact, I got on the plane, and the guy sitting next to me, who was Pakistani, said, he turned to me and he said, "Excuse me, are you American?" And I had like hijab, giant hijab. like Iranian hijab, and which is not a good, as many of you know, not the ideal way to dress in Pakistan, which I did not know at all. And he said, "You look like Osama bin Laden's sister. Take off that that heavy black covering." So I did, and in any case, this sort of the long lead up here is that the day on which I purchased my plane ticket to go and freelance for a few months in India, where I thought I would be writing about leper colonies in the South, turned into 3 years of my life in South Asia, and I ended up being based in India and Afghanistan until 2004, and then going back there a lot in the years after that. I came back to the States at a certain point, but continued to go back and write about the region. And so there was this one day that really changed my life and thrust me into this kind of reporting that I really wanted to do, but I didn't really know how to get into, and that in fact is very difficult to get into through sort of the ordinary channels. When I was young, as a reporter, I was told that you had to wait until basically everybody else in the newsroom dies or retires until you get one of these jobs as a foreign correspondent. Actually, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan changed that, because all of a sudden they were looking for young, single people to go and cover these places, and a lot of young reporters went, and as always happens with wars, kind of have made their careers in these years as foreign correspondents. So that's sort of how I got into this, and I absolutely love reporting. Like I can't even believe that people will pay you to be a reporter. It is such an exciting and thrilling job to me. It's not for everyone, but I really love it. So much so that I swore I would never become an editor. Which I've now done, so I'll get to that in a second. Some of the things that the ambassador said about press freedom and the challenges to the press in various parts of the world, are definitely true. And according to the most recent Freedom House report, global press freedom has declined to its lowest point in 12 years in 2015. And the biggest recent declines in press freedom are in places that you might have heard about, with specific crackdowns on the media, places like Turkey, Egypt, Yemen, but also Bangladesh, Burundi, and France, where the attacks on Charlie Hebdo spurred a number of laws that have put journalists under pressure, and put immigrants under pressure, and put others under pressure in various ways. And Afghanistan, where I spent a lot of time reporting, is marked as not free on this map, which, it's absolutely true. But the silver lining to that is that since the U.S. invasion and the war and the fall of the Taliban there, Afghanistan's media sector has really flourished. And during the time I was reporting there, I actually spent a lot of time getting to know Afghan journalists and talking to them, in some cases working closely with them, and I spent a little bit of time training them. But I began to be really interested in them as sort of representatives of their country and their culture, and it is a way for me as an outsider to learn about how Afghans actually communicate with each other, and how they tell stories to each other, and how they communicate information to each other. And so when I was last in Afghanistan, which was a few years ago, I spent some time shadowing a female reporter for Afghanistan's largest independent news agency, which is called Pajwak, Afghan News. And this reporter, Zarguna Salehi, was doing a story about violence in schools in Afghanistan, sort of a local story. This is a big deal in Afghanistan because respecting your elders is paramount. And what was happening here was that students were starting to attack their teachers and attack each other and attack administrators, and this was a very big deal in this society. And as many things are that are kind of new and different and happening there. So I sort of followed Zarguna around as she reported this story, and I saw that she was tough, and that she was 5 feet tall in her high heels, but that she was gonna, get the piece of paper from the Ministry of Education that was gonna get her into these schools and let her actually go in and do this reporting and talk to these principals. I saw her interviewing these men, these powerful men who were in charge of the schools, who were basically telling her nothing is going on here, this is, no students ever bring weapons here, this has never happened. And I watched her being kind of very, very dogged in her pursuit of that. But I also noticed that everywhere we went, men were in charge. And journalism, even though it's kind of, it's really, it's the media sector, as I said, exploded there, and it's gotten very big. I mean, there used to be like one radio station and one newspaper under the Taliban, and now there are hundreds of radio stations and TV stations, and there are women like Zarguna learning how to do this. There's also a lot of tradition and a lot of layers of bureaucracy, and men are definitely still in charge. So, she would go to a press conference and she would be turned away by security men, from a press conference to which she'd been invited to cover it, and they would say, it's inappropriate for you to be here and be covering this. Whether it's because she's a woman or because she's a reporter is a little unclear, because being a journalist and challenging authority in a place like that, somebody asked here, are there places where the press is really afraid to work? Yes, there are. There definitely are. And Afghanistan is one of them, and with good reason, because there are people much more powerful than you are who want to stop you. So, there were security men at checkpoints who would stop her and turn her back. And when we tried to interview some children on a public sidewalk outside a school in Kabul, there was a security guard working for the school who scolded her and sent her away. And, she finally sort of gave up and got back in a cab and went back and, went to the newsroom and wrote her story. And I was thinking about this recently because it made me really think about the institutions in which we work as reporters, and in which we all operate as people. And I was thinking about it again last month when Alyssa Rubin, who's a veteran New York Times foreign correspondent, won the Pulitzer Prize in international reporting. Now, Alyssa Rubin, as some of you may know, is like an incredible reporter. She's been covering conflict for many, many years. She's been in the Balkans and in Baghdad for the LA Times, and then she's been in Afghanistan and Iraq for the New York Times, and she's done really extraordinary work in all those places. That said, this kind of work is among the most difficult and dangerous kind of work that anyone can do, even for an American woman or an American man. She was almost killed in a helicopter crash in Kurdistan in 2014 when covering the Yazidi refugees who were being assaulted by the Islamic State. And in the Pulitzer cover letter, her editors talk about her lying in bed after she almost died in this helicopter crash, and they went to visit her, and her face was still covered with bruises, and her wrists were bandaged, and she was telling them, I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna go back. And she did, shortly after she recovered. And she actually won the Pulitzer for stories about women in Afghanistan being attacked and abused, including one you may have read about a woman who was accused of burning the Quran, which she didn't do, but she was killed by a mob. A really grisly story. So this year happens to be the 100th anniversary of the Pulitzer Prizes. And since I work at Columbia, this is much in the air around the journalism school. And as it happens, more women have won Pulitzers for international reporting than you might think. So over the last 100 years, anyone have an idea of how many women have won Pulitzers for international reporting? Sorry? No? 2 minutes? 10, okay, 10 women, right? And that's only second, that's the second highest number, or it's sort of maybe the third highest number of prizes have been won in that category by women. The highs are in feature writing and investigative reporting, where women have each won 15 prizes, okay? So this is out of a total of something like 900 Pulitzers that have been awarded over the last 100 years. And 794 men have won, and the rest have been won by women. So it's about 140 something. What I'm trying to get to here is that, as it turns out, what Alyssa Rubin did in reporting those stories and winning that prize is done more and more now. There are more and more women out on the front lines, reporting in conflict zones, and doing this really dangerous work. And some of them have been killed, some of them have been injured. What isn't happening as much is women sitting in offices in New York making decisions about which stories get told and who gets to tell them and what news gets covered and who wins prizes. And so, as I said, I never thought I would become an editor, but I've now kind of moved into this role and crossed this barrier, and I really miss reporting, but in a certain way, this new job makes me more powerful, because I get to decide who gets published in CJR, who gets to tell these stories, and who doesn't. And I can also extend myself to help women and minorities in all the ways I wish an editor would extend himself or herself sometimes, to help me when I was young in my career, And when I needed most what every writer needs, which is for someone to take a chance or take a gamble that he or she could do something really great. And if that writer happens to be a woman or even an Afghan woman, so much the better. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to follow up with any of that in Q&A. Thank you.